Hey, it's Otter. Let's talk about Crestron Construct and what it means, especially to some of us who have been doing this for a while. So to start, the fact of the matter is that time and tide bring change. And in even the trajectory of technology where change happens so fast at certain levels, in other places, we've had relative stability. And when I say stability, there's been this long duration or long-term use of a singular tool as it's evolved. It's also, if you haven't looked at it at all, there's FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The only way to get past those things is to jump right in. Speaking of jumping in, first place you can go, besides just downloading the software, opening it, and poking around, is that we have both online /live and self-paced courses to introduce you to Crestron Construct. And they're just as good. If you spent your life in VT Pro E, these classes will help orient you into Construct with the HTML5 plugin. There's new terminology that comes with this. And learning the terminology, I think, was one of the first things that I had to work through in my head. Because, yeah, I did the same thing everybody else would do initially, and before we had classes. This HTML5 plugin into Construct lets me move forward, gives me a familiar workflow, but I got new terms. I have some new concepts I have to think about. We don't have subpages anymore now when we get into CH5. It took me a little bit to figure that out. Oh, a widget is a subpage. Are there different rules? Yeah. One of the other rules that came up, and what you find out is all this time we've been doing like 1 or 2 pages, lots of subpages. Well, that wasn't always true. Back in the day of Synapse, it was many pages, few subpages. Guess what? More things change, the more they stay the same, and what goes around comes around, and we're back to, this is mostly about doing pages and not utilizing subpages, and this has to do with the relationship of the DOM. It's these kinds of things figuring out, and the best way to learn about those things, of course, is taking the classes. The classes will help you work through and learn some of the terminology. A couple other things I figured out along the way was my workflow didn't really change, but there were certain tools that became a little more important to me as I found things that weren't there. Like, I'm a big drag, select, move stuff kind of guy. We do this all the time, especially for just micro-moving stuff around. And normally in that, when you had lots of layers and stuff, you would, lock objects so they wouldn't move, so that you can move things around. And, well, we don't have a lock in Construct, for example. But we do have a layer manager. Now, the layer manager reminds me a lot of working with things like in Photoshop, where if I don't really want to work with something or I don't want it to be disturbed, I just simply click the eyeball and make it go away. It didn't disappear off my project. It's just not going to be affected by my activity, my mouse and keyboard activity, because it's not visible, it's not actual on the system until I re-enable it, and then I can work with it. A few other things, besides the layer manager becoming important, is that the properties tree that we were used to looking at now looks way different, because it's not just a property tree. It's actually a properties pane. They are listed out and broken down by categories. And although the names are the same, they're kind of organized a little different. And there's interactivity between the main pane, properties pane, and the layer manager that you just kind of work with. So learning to work with those into your workflow is probably one of the things that you'll find you spend a little time rethinking. Just remember, you're still drawing buttons. It's just, instead of having 3 buttons, you now got 1 button that did everything the 3 buttons in VT Pro E did. Right? So there's been some condensation or condensing, and that condensate is now a button object. And that A button and that button object acts as everything. And then there's a few other little tools, things like the glyph, right? Took me a little bit to get used to the glyph. Because there are some functions there that let me interact from there into my property windows, things like adding modes, deleting and moving, right? Those kind of things. This also was a little bit of a change in my normal workflow. I didn't find it too tedious. It was just like vocabulary, right? Like the words, these activities I had to rethink. But in the end, after doing a couple projects, I was like, I'm not even thinking about it anymore, right? It was just getting used to working with the plugin in Construct. And I keep referring to it that way. And at some point, when we have more to plug in to the IDE of Construct, we'll have more to talk about then. And then on the final end, so learning the terminology, seeing and adapting your old VT Pro E muscle memory into new muscle memory, knowing where things are on the property list and how things behave, the interactivity with the layer manager, probably some of the most important things you can focus on if you're doing the transition from VT Pro E into Construct. On a couple final notes, Smart Graphics gave us these contract type things. Now, all of a sudden, contracts are floated all the way up. There's a good portion of what I believe in that contracts are really great over join numbers. That doesn't mean I don't use join numbers. I actually mix them. I found that there are certain things I want to use as standard joins. These are usually things that I'm going to share across multiple interfaces anyways. They're just one trigger to one thing. It's just repeat, repeat, repeat. Instead of making, I can just use the join, copy the join over to the other join, just like we used to do. But I find contracts make other things like widget lists and those type of objects easier to work with because signals are already named. I don't have to keep track of join numbers in my head, the great big yellow pad with all the little scribbly notes on it. You know who you are. I'm one of them. So those kind of things. And then ultimately, a couple of things to think about. So we have these things referred to as classic and modern. So layer order classic, right? Lowest on the top versus modern, lowest or furthest back on the bottom. I prefer that setting. And just for the ease, especially when it comes to widget lists, there's a term called modern and classic. Classic makes a monolithic set for things like your widget list. I actually have found this to be quite handy when I have a number of things, like 20 or 30 things in my widget list. Over doing the modern, which each one would become its own little thing. And this has more to do with right-click, drag and drop copy, right? Over anything else that we have to do. And that's about speed and speed programming. So in my world, I'm running modern layer, classic widget list. Those are the only two settings. Everything else is kept up. Well, that's what I got. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, do those normal things. Gave me a camera, gave me a mic, said make a show. There you go. See ya.